This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real friendships and real emotions. It begins not with a funeral, but with silence. The kind of silence that comes after a long life filled with laughter. Mel Brooks had spent most of his life making people laugh. For decades, his voice, his jokes, and his timing brought joy to millions. But behind that laughter was a man who had also lived long enough to watch many people he loved slowly disappear. Age does that. It gives you memories, but it also takes people away. One of the most important people in Mel's life was Rob Reiner. They were not just co-workers or comedy partners. They were like brothers. For years and years, they spoke almost every day. They shared meals, jokes, and quiet evenings. As they grew older, their friendship became simpler. No big parties, no loud rooms, just time together. One of their favorite habits was watching Jeopardy together. They would sit in the same chairs, turn on the television, and quietly enjoy the show. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. But being there together was enough. When Carl passed away, something inside Mel changed. The house felt quieter. The phone rang less often. The world felt a little colder. Mel told himself this was normal. He told himself he was strong enough to handle it. After all, he had lived through loss before. But some losses are heavier than others. After Carl was gone, Mel believed that part of his life had ended too. Then, one day, Carl's son Rob reached out. Rob Reiner had grown up around Mel. To Mel, Rob was not just Carl's son, he was family. Rob understood what Mel was missing. He understood the empty chair, the quiet evenings, the feeling that time was moving forward without asking permission. So Rob invited Mel to continue the old habit. "We can watch Jeopardy together," he said. It wasn't a big request. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. And because it was simple, it mattered. Mel hesitated at first. He worried that sitting with Rob would remind him too much of Carl. He worried it would hurt. But in the end, he agreed. And so the habit continued. Different house, different chair, same quiet comfort. Two men, older now, sharing time because time was something they both understood was limited. Years passed. The world changed. People came and went. And then, in this fictional story, the idea of loss returned again. The thought of saying goodbye one more time felt unbearable. Not because there was no love, but because there was too much of it. Mel began to feel that his heart had already carried all the grief it could hold. The idea of standing in a room filled with sorrow, of facing another final goodbye, made his chest feel tight. He told himself that grief does not always look like tears in public. Sometimes it looks like staying home. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting alone, staring at an empty chair, wondering how many goodbyes one lifetime is supposed to survive. Outside only saw what they wanted to see. They noticed absence before they noticed pain. Questions began to appear. Why wasn't Mel there? How could someone so close stay away? The public often forgets that famous people grieve the same way everyone else does. They assume strength means showing up. They assume love means standing in front of others and proving it. But grief does not follow rules. Grief does not care about expectations. For Mel, grief had become something quiet and heavy, something he carried alone. He did not speak right away, because speaking meant opening a door he had worked hard to keep closed. He had spent his life turning pain into humor. But this pain could not be turned into a joke. It had no punchline. In this imagined story, Mel finally agreed to explain himself through words that were simple and honest. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. He only spoke about how tired he felt. Tired of goodbyes. Tired of standing next to coffins. Tired of pretending that each loss did not take something from him. He spoke about how losing Carl had already felt like losing part of himself. How continuing the Jeopardy nights with Rob had been his way of staying close to that past without reopening the wound too deeply. And how the thought of another final moment made him feel like he was drowning in memories. He explained that love does not disappear when someone is not physically present. Love lives in habits. Love lives in shared silence. Love lives in the way a person remembers another when no one is watching. He spoke about how on that day he stayed inside. He did not turn on the lights right away. He sat in the same chair he always sat in. He turned on the television out of habit, even though he wasn't really watching. He admitted that he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone who has cried many times before and no longer has the energy for anything else. He said that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they are tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of being the one who makes others smile. Tired of carrying memories that feel heavier every year. In this story, Mel did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for understanding. He only asked for space. Space to grieve in his own way. Space to remember laughter instead of focusing only on loss. He reminded people that grief is not a performance. It is not something owed to the public. It is personal. It is private. And sometimes it is too heavy to be shared. As this fictional story comes to a close, it returns to something small and simple. A quiet evening. A familiar television show. A chair that still feels warm with memory. Mel sits alone, but he is not truly alone. The room holds echoes of laughter that once filled it, the jokes told too many times, the pauses where no one needed to speak. He understands now that love does not end when people leave. It stays in routines. It stays in habits that refuse to disappear. Turning on the television at the same time each evening, sitting in the same chair, smiling at the same questions on the screen. In his mind, Carl is still there. Rob is still there. Not as loss, but as presence. This story is not about refusing a goodbye. It is about choosing a different way to remember. Some people honor love by standing in crowds. Others honor it by sitting alone with memory. Neither way is wrong. Both come from the same place, a heart that cared deeply. Mel understands that time will continue to move forward whether he is ready or not. He understands that more goodbyes may come, but he also understands that he does not have to face them all in the same way. As the screen fades to black, the message is simple. Grief is not weakness. Silence is not absence. And love does not disappear just because it hurts too much to say goodbye out loud. Sometimes, the strongest form of love is remembering quietly, staying connected through small moments, and allowing yourself to feel without explanation. In the end, this fictional story is not about death. It is about life, about friendship that lasts longer than words, about laughter that echoes even after voices are gone, and about a man who spent his life making others laugh, learning that it is okay to sit still, to feel deeply, and to remember in his own way. Mel Brooks and Rob Reiner shared a friendship that was built on years of respect, creativity, and quiet understanding. To the public, both men were symbols of laughter and success, known for bringing joy to millions through comedy and film. But behind closed doors, their lives were far more complex than the images people saw on screens. After the passing of Carl Reiner, the emotional balance of Rob Reiner's home changed forever. Carl had been the heart of that house, a man whose humor filled every room and whose presence made even silence feel warm and safe. When Mel Brooks first began spending time in the house again, he immediately felt that something was different. Rob was kind and welcoming, but he was not his father. He did not laugh as easily, and he carried a quiet weight that never seemed to leave his shoulders. The house itself felt heavier, as if the walls remembered Carl and mourned him in their own way. Mel and Rob would sit together in the living room, often turning on the television at the same time, watching familiar shows like Jeopardy! Not because they were deeply interested, but because the sound filled the silence. Those moments were not about entertainment. They were about routine, about holding on to something normal, while everything else felt uncertain. Mel later admitted that he did not come for the television or the shows. He came because that house represented memory, loyalty, and love. Over time, Mel noticed that Rob seemed tired in a way that rest could not fix. His calm voice often hid deep exhaustion, and his smiles rarely reached his eyes. There were long evenings when the television played, but no one truly watched it. Rob would stare at the screen, lost in thought, as if his mind was somewhere far away. In those quiet moments, Mel began to sense things that were never said out loud. He sensed pressure, emotional pain, and a loneliness that came from always having to stay strong for others. The warmth that once defined the house had been replaced by tension, unspoken fear, and sadness that lingered in the air. Mel felt it in every corner of the room. Even breathing felt heavier. He realized that Rob was carrying more than grief. He was carrying a burden that no parent ever wants to admit they are struggling with. At first, Mel tried to ignore it, telling himself that all families go through difficult times. But the longer he stayed, the clearer it became that this was not a passing phase. Something was deeply wrong, and it was slowly pulling Rob further into emotional isolation. Mel Brooks spent more time in Rob Reiner's home. He began to witness moments that stayed with him long after he left. These were not small disagreements or ordinary family stress. They were sudden outbursts filled with anger, fear, and pain, most of them involving Rob's son, Nick. At first, Mel tried to make sense of what he saw, believing there must be stress or pressure he did not fully understand. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. Nick's anger often appeared without warning, erupting over issues that seemed minor on the surface. One evening, a delay in a money transfer was enough to trigger a violent reaction. Nick began shouting, his voice shaking with rage, slamming his hand on the table and demanding answers. Michelle stood frozen, unable to speak, while Rob sat still, clearly afraid to make the situation worse. Mel felt something